Hi, I'm Susan. I'm from Worldpeacefull, and tonight's video is definitely inspired. And I'll be honest, I had a bit of a cry last night over an experience that's an injustice for me. But I'm a spiritual person, and I have to look within myself because, I'm feeling sad about something that has hurt me deeply. But the reason for this video is not so much to speak about that, even though that was the catalyst for this video. It was really to talk about what came after. Funnily enough, where I'm staying here, I've been looking after a couple of dogs, and beautiful Alsatian dogs, really lovely, really beautiful dogs. And because it was going to get hot, I ended up sending them off to the daughter's place. And I just found out this morning that one of them died. It was the older dog. She's a very beautiful dog, very gentle, and I felt love for these lovely dogs. Anyway, as a result of that news and having had a bad night, this sort of feeling of, not being able to overcome injustice in life, it sent me on a little bit of a journey of reflection of those around the world who were feeling pain and suffering around things that they felt were unjust. And of course, my work is peace. And I want to see our world become a kinder and more loving place. And, I've had pain come to me for many years now because of this particular situation that there was no fairness. There was only one side considered, and what these teachers taught me was that my life wasn't valued and that my side was irrelevant, even though there was two sides to the matter. And what I've really struggled with over the years is the unfairness of the outcome. So these two events combined sent me off to the beach. I thought I'll go for a walk on the beach and just put my feet in the surf and, just felt sad as I walked. But at the same time, I felt the rejuvenating power of nature. And I felt, that there's much to be grateful for in life, and that we cannot change other people. We can only change ourselves. I know how kind my heart is, and I know that my intention is always to serve others. I only speak what I speak because I feel it's true or it's in the highest interest of the other party as well. And when you're misunderstood, it's incredibly painful. But I did reflect on the Middle East and, how the Palestinians may feel when their family members are killed, or the Syrians when their families are killed, or in any war zone really, where people are really suffering very, very deeply and they're carrying such enormous pain. And there's no countervailing situation occurring where someone says sorry to that person, or the person comes to the realization that what they did was not right, or demonstrated any compassion towards the one suffering. The reality is, in the world we're in, is that people are not going to come back and apologize or suddenly reform. I went back to childhood situations where I was unjustly treated. I'm a very truthful person, and I very much stand in my truth, and I don't care what the consequences are. I have a very strong sense of human rights and ethics, and it's put me in conflict with people who are into power or don't care what I think. And this can be very painful when you're coming from a very honest space. And that's not to say there's not two sides to the matter. There always is two sides, and I'm personally very open to two sides. But what we see in the world today is that people are not getting resolution. They're not getting the resolution that they really need to move on and flower in their own life. And I know in my situation, it really affected me very deeply, to the point of wanting to end my life many times. And it's not mental instability, it was more to do with ideology of what I felt was right. And I came up against something or a situation where people did not share the values that I express, or there was judgment made about myself, which was, in my view, untrue. However, this is the world we're in. And I do remember when I came across Byron Katie many years ago, I was grappling with the same situation but in another form. And I was deeply seeking peaceful transformation because I did not want my life to be affected by the negative attitudes of others who were refusing to meet halfway or acknowledge their part. In other words, take responsibility for what they did. So life sent me this major test, and it is a major test for me, definitely, because I've suffered so deeply over it. But I'm lucky in the sense that I'm a peacemaker and I can see the test for what it is. When I go through the pain, it's enormous. And sometimes I don't know if I can continue to endure the pain that I've endured. But I know I'm here for a purpose, so, and I'm not saying that with there's no ego around this. I dreamed I was teaching peace. I know it's true. And that doesn't mean I'm going to save the world and teach you all peace. I don't know what my future holds, but I know that I am inspired by peace. And I've been lucky enough to come across the wisdom of those who do know what peace really is. I'm not at their level, and that's something I'm certain of. However, something within me recognises the truth. Maybe it's the wisdom within me. So the truth has many dimensions, and I guess on the human third dimensional space, which is where we all live, what we would say is right and wrong is truth. Well, I've come to understand that it's not about right and wrong anymore. I've realised that we all have purposes, and we're spiritual beings in physical bodies. This is what I know. And I know this because I did near-death research. I've also had spiritual experiences which have given me the evidence that's made very clear to me that we are much more than what we see. And I've been going over this for 18 years now, so this is not a new thing. I'm also an analyst, so I don't take things on face value. I very much bear them out in my own experience. I'm an observer and an analyst. I'm a problem solver. And I'm deeply interested in truth. So it's not my truth. I'm interested in its truth that underlies circumstances. So going back to this higher knowledge, on a spiritual level, we've come into the world to have an experience. Now, there is people reflecting life experiences of doing good for each other or being good or in service to each other. And then there are others, what would be deemed service to self. And you could ascertain or argue that that's selfishness, or these people going through the life very much with their own interests in mind. Now, in the spiritual worldview that I'm becoming more conversant with, it's not to judge right or wrong, even in situations where people are doing things that hurt others. As a peacemaker, I have to step back and I have to look at, well, what is it within me that's hurting? And that's not to say that another person hasn't had negative intent. They may well have. But in order for me to release myself from suffering, I have to look into the source of that suffering. And it could come from powerlessness, injustice. Something's unfair, something's a lie, where I've felt somehow demonised or treated unfairly when I've sought to speak truth and resolve the matter so I can move on with my life. I could sit in bitterness about all the peace work I didn't do, although I consider the experience one of peace work, so I'm very lucky in that regard because I do see it as part of my work, even though I haven't been able to, get my actual work in schools going. There's been issues I've had to deal with within myself, and I believe that we are all the microcosm of the macrocosm. So what's happening within me is happening within others. And so until I can find peace in the face of injustice, my work's not done, is the way I see it. I typically don't demonise people in my own mind, although I have my moments when I don't think highly of them. But then I bring myself back to centre and I say, well, they're doing the job they're here for. And maybe that part of that job is for me to look at me, not them. So for those of you who are suffering out there, which is the purpose of this video, sometimes you can't right the wrongs. Sometimes you are in situations of powerlessness in respect of human power. Some people may have more resources. Some people may be unethical. And that can create situations that put you in a worse light. Some people are not interested in learning. So it's not like eventually they're going to get it. They may not. And I've had examples, in my life of people who didn't get it until they got it, and it had nothing to do with me. So if I think that I'm going to teach someone to treat others with respect, to speak the truth, to acknowledge their part, they may not. And I suspect for many listening to this, they will have these encounters, unfortunately, but it is the way it is. And I always knew when I came across Byron Katie many years ago, I was actually on the Rotary Peace and Conflict Studies program in Bangkok at the time. And I was desperately searching for transformative peace because I was suffering at that time too. It's been a long time that I've carried this. And when I read her book, 1,000 Names for Joy and Loving What Is, I was deeply inspired because she was all about questioning the thoughts and that all suffering happened in the thoughts. And that's not to say that other people don't try and make you suffer because they're suffering themselves. But ultimately, if you cannot change them, you can always change you. And the ultimate end of all of this is for us to have our own happiness. I mean, I want to be released from my own suffering so that I can be of service to children and the community. I actually want to serve humanity. That's been always my interest. And perhaps the pain that I have endured is to do with myself developing a deeper sense of empathy for those who are truly suffering. Maybe my work down the track is to say to those who cannot let go of conflict that I understand deeply how you feel. And I'm a very deeply compassionate and kind person. So for those who may not feel the way I do about humanity, this can be a living, the only word that comes to my mind is a living hell for them. If they're holding revenge and they're fighting, and it's just endless cycles of conflict and reaction. And that the other becomes this sort of projected entity that's destroying their life or preventing them from happiness. And all I can say to those listening who are having that experience is that the other is not responsible for your pain. That's not to say that other hasn't done things that have really hurt you. They would have. But because the event is finished and it's still recurring in our hearts as painful, that's happening within us. It's because we haven't been able to let go of an injustice. And we're worried that if we let go of that injustice, it's giving some sort of green light to the other that this is okay, what they've done. But in truth, that's not true. And what I'll say next is not really about retribution. It's what goes around comes around. And I don't mean it as, the words that are coming to my mind is what you sow, you reap. I mean, these are truisms. But it's not a revenge thing, universally speaking. It's just cause and effect. And because we're all one, we're the one life force, if you like, that's connected. Quite naturally, what you do to another will return to the self. And it's not revenge or karma, it's just energy responsibility, the way it's described. And we wouldn't want others to suffer like us. We only may believe that because we're hurting. But I truly don't want anyone to hurt. My greatest wish for them would be illumination or realization of who they are. So going back to what I was saying in the very beginning here it's kind of been an interesting day. I went down to the beach and I walked in the water and have some interesting spiritual material that I'm reading about happiness, actually, which is my favourite topic as a clown. I want to bring happiness to the world. And it took me a while to work through my own heaviness that I felt. And then I came back here later. I'm about an hour away from the beach, and I live in the most beautiful wilderness area. So I'm surrounded by trees and nature, what I call the Garden of Eden. Anyway, a dear friend rang me, and she's on a similar path to me. We had a good talk and reflected that our lives are on similar trajectories because she's also going through some challenges herself, because she also wants to see our world change in a way that's very positive and proactive. She's also investigating the discrimination and the powerlessness that's evoked through attitudes in society. And she's a very unique and refreshing type of thinker. She's a philosopher like I am. It's really lovely to meet, fellow travellers who are here to question this paradigm. And so we talked and we had a wonderful chat. And then I noticed Jim Carrey came on TV. And I love Jim Carrey. He's a clown. He's hilarious. I laughed my head off. And he was doing a film. What was it called? On God. Hang on, I'm just looking at the internet as I'm sharing with you. So it was called Bruce Almighty was the film. And he apparently believes in miracles himself. So miracles became the subject matter. I was reading about miracles too in this spiritual book that I've got. And he reckons that he won a contest for his dream bike and he didn't even enter, he says. And it actually talks about the film that he was in, Bruce Almighty. And he said he once prayed for a Mustang bike only for it to turn up at his house. He says he recalls there was a teacher in Catholic school, an Irish girl, who prayed to the Virgin Mary whenever she wanted anything in her life to happen. He said, I sat at the back of the classroom and thought that sounded cool. So I went home and prayed to the Virgin Mary that night for a Mustang bike. 2 weeks later, he says, I walked home from school, walked through my living room into my bedroom, and my brother came in and said, didn't you see what was in the living room? Apparently, the whole family was standing around a lime green Mustang bike. I had won it in a raffle that I didn't enter, he said. A friend of mine had gone into a sporting goods store that had this raffle and entered my name separately 2 weeks before. So I won't read on. I was just really commenting on that because it was reinforcing the fact that miracles exist. I've had many miracles in my own life. You know, I remember my car was making really weird noises over near Perth. I think I was 300 k's out of Perth, and I didn't have much money, and I was in a caravan park, and there was only a couple in the caravan park. And I walked up to the woman and I just said, "Oh, you wouldn't happen to know of any mechanics?" And it was a Sunday. And then she laughed and said, "You won't believe it, but my partner's just turned up 5 minutes ago. He's a mechanic." And he had a look at my car. I've had lots and lots of things happen. I've even found money on the ground. You know, I remember when I was talking to an Irish girl in Dublin. I stayed with her and I said to her, "Oh, no, there's miracles." She goes, "Oh, Susan, there's no miracles. You're talking this and that." Anyway, she helped me get to the bus with my bags. I was on a world trip at the time. And she goes, "Oh my goodness, there's 50 euro. I'm not good at speaking Irish, but hey, there was 50 euro on the ground." She goes, "Oh my goodness, Susan, there's 50 euro. And I laughed. We walked for another 20 metres and she goes, "Oh my goodness, there's another 50 euro. She picks it up, 100 euro. And then I walked on further and I found 50 and then another 50. We found 200 euro within the space of 5 minutes. She looked at me and she goes, "Susan, there are miracles." And she was right, there are. I've had other things happen, but you'd have to look at my book. You can download a full for peace. I've got stories in there actually of things that have happened. I know there is a greater presence, and I don't like to label it because there's a lot of baggage that hangs off the labels. But I absolutely know it because I feel the love within myself around this. And part of my work in peace is accepting life as it is. And that's extremely difficult to do in a world where there is so much fear and negativity around. But again, it's a bit like the idea of water is flowing around things. You know, when you kind of are a very honest person, you're more likely to speak up and say what you think. And I don't dissuade anyone from doing that. I think it's the way to go. But do it with respect always. They know not what they do is a very famous saying, and it's very true. If people knew what they were doing, they wouldn't do it. Fear often is behind people's actions rather than sitting down and being brave enough to have a conversation or acknowledging their part. People will blame another or they'll be in denial about their responsibility and the mistakes they made. And this is what it is to be human. We learn or we don't. But from my spiritual perspective, you know, you come back again. So you don't really escape natural justice anyway. And there is some comfort in that thought, you know, that life is natural justice because we're all one. So I wanted to talk a little bit about miracles because I think it's a topic that will bring hope to humanity, and it may well break us out of this endless cycle of, you know, fighting. And that's not to say you can't speak your truth, you can. But if you want the other to change, they may not. So you can only really speak your truth from the point of view of yourself, but be sure that when you do speak your truth, you don't go into blame or negativity or criticism of the other. Just try and outline the facts and see where you go from there. So I want to read you a little bit of Raymond Moody, actually. I did some work on him many years ago. He's in my book too, so if you get a full for peace, you can actually download it as a PDF and have a look at the section on near-death experience. But I thought I might read you a little bit from Raymond Moody, and this is what gives me hope when I feel utter despair. when I don't feel heard or I don't feel there's justice, I have to keep reminding myself that there's actually a bigger picture to life than my situation, and it's very important that my gifts and talents are not truncated because of the unkindness of others. And of course, I say this bearing in mind there's always two sides, which I'm always open to. But unfortunately, if people don't communicate or dialogue, you're only really left with your own thoughts about a situation. So I suspect these days more and more people will feel unresolved, and this is why I want to read this for you now. Dr. Raymond Moody is an expert on near-death experience. He's been doing it since 1975, in actual fact. I'll read you a bit about him first. In 1975, Dr. Raymond Moody, you can go to www.lifeafterdeath.com, this is his work, released his best-selling book, Life After Life, which focused public attention on the near-death experience like never before. It was Moody who actually coined the term near-death experience. You can read more about Dr. Moody at his website. He's also the author of the books The Light Beyond, Reunions, Life After Loss, Coming Back, Reflections, and The Last Laugh. I think I like that one. Actually, I'm just going to click on that because being a clown, that interests me. I'll just see what it says. I'm curious. They're just showing the book, The Last Laugh. Okay, it's not really saying much because I'm looking at Amazon here. Never mind. It looks good, and I would think that that's a very fitting statement. Dr. Moody recorded and compared the experience of 150 persons who died or almost died and then recovered. His research describes the results of decades of inquiry into NDE phenomenon, that's near-death experience. He outlines 9 elements that generally occur during NDEs, or near-death experiences. So these are the 9 elements. 1, a strange sound, a buzzing or ringing noise while having a sense of being dead. 2, peace and painlessness. While people are dying, they may be in intense pain, but as soon as they leave the body, the pain vanishes and they experience peace. Out-of-body experience. The dying often have the sensation of rising up and floating above their own body while it is surrounded by a medical team and watching it down below while feeling comfortable. They experience the feeling of being in a spiritual body that appears to be a sort of living energy field. The tunnel experience is number 4. The next experience is that of being drawn into darkness through a tunnel at an extremely high speed until reaching a realm of radiant golden white light. Also, although they sometimes report feeling scared, they do not sense that they were on the way to hell or that they fell into it. That could help Christians, that one. Number 5, rising rapidly into the heavens. Instead of a tunnel, some people report rising suddenly into the heavens and seeing the earth and the celestial sphere as they would be seen by astronauts in space. My mother had this experience when she was praying to be shown the truth. She said she went out of her body and she looked down upon the earth and it was crystal clear and still is today. And she said she saw a being with white robes on who was underneath her. So she was overviewing that being. 6, people of light. Once on the other side of the tunnel, or after they have risen into the heavens, the dying people meet who glow with an inner light. That's interesting the way it's worded. That's not really well written. What they're really saying is that they meet beings of light. Often they find that friends and relatives who have already died are there to greet them. In my own experience, because I've interviewed people who have died and come back, some of them will meet, beings like Jesus, but it's not necessarily a Christian thing. It's a Christ-like thing. This is Christ consciousness, which is purity of consciousness, which is fully unconditionally loving. In other parts of the world, I'm quite certain that they would be meeting beings that reflect their understanding. Others meet their family members, or they might even meet pets who come running up to them. But there's always someone loving and familiar to them, and they get showered in light. I can remember an Irish woman that I met, and I knew there was a glow around her. Turns out she had a near death, and a young boy who she met at Lourdes in France who was dying. He actually did die, and she said she had a weak heart, and sometimes her heart stopped. And on one occasion, amongst many others, it did stop. And she remembers being in a barrel, not a tunnel, she described it as. And she saw this boy's face. And he said, "I love you, Margaret," he said in his beautiful Irish accent. And she said she remembers going very, very fast down this barrel towards the light, and she could see a light being at the end. The love, she said, was indescribable. She said it's nothing like here on earth. That's real love that she felt. And she woke up. So going back to the people of light, they often see beings. The next one is actually a being of light, which is interesting. So they called number 6 people of light. 7 was the being of light. After meeting the people of light, the dying often meet a powerful spiritual being whom some have identified as God, Jesus, or some religious figure. This is very true. I'm sure Muhammad has been meeting people too, or Buddha. You've got to understand that these beings on the other side have actually no identity. They are pure love, essence. And typically they come to us in the way that we can understand. So if you were on another planet, another solar system, where you were not human, I'm sure that essence comes to you in another way. So it's a shape-changing essence, essentially. But because we're here on Earth and we only know our human condition, we see it in a human-type form. That's my understanding. Number 8 is the life review. The being of light presents the dying with a panoramic review of everything they have ever done. That is, they relive every act that they have ever done to other people and come away feeling that love is the most important thing in life. Now, I've discovered this through my own research. Not only do they go through a life review, so people describe it as events flashing before their eyes very rapidly, so that from childhood throughout their life. But not only does that happen, you actually will see it from the other person's perspective as well. So not only are you seeing your life flash, but you're seeing how others have seen you all in an instant, because on the other side there's no time. Now, this idea of love being the most important thing, what I learned from the people I interviewed was they were not afraid of death at all, and they realised that love was the only purpose for life. Perhaps that's why I've chosen to be unconditionally loving in my life, and I'm working on it. There are times when I'm not feeling it, and I know that that's some fear inside of myself that I have to deal with. But our true nature is incredibly loving and incredibly beautiful. And this is who we really are. So those who have died and come back express that idea of a life review and that they're no longer afraid of death. This last one's really interesting too. Point 9 is reluctance to return. The being of light sometimes tells the dying that they must return to life. Other times they are given a choice of staying or returning. In either case, they are reluctant to return. The people who choose to return do so only because of loved ones they do not wish to leave behind. And I might just share a few stories of people I talked to who didn't want to come back. I can feel tears. It's really interesting as I start to reflect. There was a woman I interviewed who died on the operating table, and she said she remembers going above her body and there was colourful lights all around her. She said that when she looked upon her body, she felt no connection to it whatsoever. Now, she had children, she felt no connection to that. She was given, I believe, a choice. The voice did talk to her, and she ended up coming back. Another guy definitely had a head-on collision, and he remembers floating above his body, and he said he looked down on the ambulance. And this guy, he was a very interesting fellow. He said he was definitely hearing a voice saying, you can go back, or you may keep going, like go to the light. Now, he said that when he was in that state, he felt no pain. He said it was incredibly beautiful where he was. But for some reason, he chose to come back. And he said he remembers waking up 3 months later because he was in a coma. And 3/4 of his brain had exploded on impact with the car accident. And he said to me that he remembers talking to people, and he thought he was talking normally, but it was blah, blah, blah. It was blabber. No one could understand what he was talking about. But he said he came back with extrasensory perception. He could read people's thoughts. When I sat with him at a large table we were at, he told me there were people around us in spirit. He described what they were wearing. It was very weird because I always remember that time because I was exploring this myself, and suddenly I realised that my thoughts were like a glass house, that my thoughts were known from these other spiritual perspectives. And it felt very strange because I thought, I better watch my thinking, what am I thinking? Today I'm not at all concerned, and I know my mind is a glass house. And I'm at peace now with whatever I'm thinking, because I know that there's great love on that other side. And that's what I had to remind myself of today when I was feeling like, really sad. I have to keep reminding that I'm loved, and that people don't define that for me. And I guess for those who've gone over the other side and come back, they start to realise that life goes on and that it's not just in this lifetime. So they are asked if they want to stay or go back. I met a guy too in a library. This was in Melbourne. I used to spend a lot of time. I used to go to a coffee shop and read spiritual information. And then I would go to the library and do research. It was on my way from my house. And I met this guy at the library. He used to talk to me a lot. And he told me that he'd never told anyone this before, but he was lying in bed with his wife, and he died. And he said he went up through the corner of the room, and he met with God, actually. He said, this is a really great story, and it was true what he said. I know. I saw his eyes. And he said to me that he was told that it was his time. He actually was to die at that time. And he spoke to a light being, he said, and they said that it was your time. And he said, I have to go back because I've got children. And they said, you can go back. And they said that it won't be easy for you if you go back. And he would be suffering if he comes back. And he decided to come back for his children. And in the next instant, he woke up and his wife was shaking him. And I said to him, has your life been hard? And he said, yes, it's been really difficult. But I felt very privileged that this man shared this with me. Anyway, I don't have any doubt that this is true, and every now and then we kind of need reminders. Maybe this video is for you, to remind you that we are all one and we're here to love each other. And this is not romance, this is true love. We care about one another. And just harking back to Jim Carrey in the movie that he was in tonight, what the storyline talked about was he was beseeching God, God help me. Apparently he was an anchor, and some other, media anchor took his job, and he was really angry and revenge. And he was, everything went wrong. His car got, he had an accident and he got beaten up in an alley. He got kicked out of his job. Everything went wrong, and he's desperate, calling to God. And then God turns up as this black guy in a building, and he bestows on him his powers. And then he can change everything. He's God, for a time. And so he gets his job back, and it makes love, the best sex he's ever had in his entire life. Brings the moon closer. It was hilarious. He lassoed the moon and brought it in. And apparently, it was a very funny movie, actually. They had a computer screen, and all the prayers come in, like there's millions of prayers, and he's got to answer them because he's taking over God's job. He just decided to go yes as a mass answer. And so people were winning lottery all over the place with very tiny amounts because everyone won. It was very, very funny. And in the end, when he'd had that opportunity to have whatever he wanted, his partner left him because he had to honour free will, because she saw him kiss someone. And he then decided, he suffered a lot with her leaving, and then he looked up at the sky and he said, "I surrender." It was actually quite an accurate depiction of the spiritual reality. And he got hit by a truck. That was funny. And there he is. He's like dead on the other side. And God's talking to him. And he talks about his partner called Grace. Great name. And then God says, "Well, what do you want for Grace?" And rather than saying, "I want her to love me," which was what he was saying in life, he said, "I want her to be happy. I want her to be loved as God loves." And this is the real love. It's the real love that I'm also in my own life trying to understand is completely unselfish, a totally selfless love. And I have felt it as a clown because I wasn't thinking. I've just loved people and hugged them, and I feel a very deep sense of connectedness. So God ends up sending him back to life, and he gets the opportunity to really love his partner in an unselfish way. So from my perspective, living the spiritual life that I lead, that movie was no coincidence for me, which is why this video has been created. I had the feeling that I'm to do a video. I didn't know it was on near-death experience, actually, until I sat and I contemplated miracles. So I'm going to read you a little bit more about Dr. Raymond Moody on the being of light to try and evoke within you a personal inquiry into who you wish to become. The following is an excerpt from Moody's excellent book, Life After Life, concerning the being of light. What is perhaps the most incredible common element in the accounts I have studied, and is certainly the element which has the most profound effect upon the individual, is the encounter with a very bright light. Typically, at its first appearance, this light is dim, but it rapidly gets brighter until it reaches an unearthly brilliance. Yet even though this light, and he's got in brackets, usually said to be white or clear, is of an indescribable brilliance, many make the specific point that it does not in any way hurt their eyes or dazzle them or keep them from seeing other things around them, in brackets, perhaps because at this point they don't have physical eyes to be dazzled. I'll just state, in addition to this, Margaret, who I met, who was Irish, described the light in that way to me. She said it was indescribable and it was love that she'd never known. Raymond Moody goes on to say, despite the light's unusual manifestation, however, not one person has expressed any doubt whatsoever that it was a being of light. Not only that, It is a personal being. It has a very definite personality. The love and the warmth which emanate from this being to the dying person are utterly beyond words. And he feels, or she feels, completely surrounded by it and taken up in it, completely at ease and accepted in the presence of this being. He senses an irresistible magnetic attraction to this light. He is ineluctable, I can't read the word, ineluctably drawn to it. So you get the point, it's like a magnet, this light. Interestingly, while the above description of the being of light is utterly invariable, the identification of the being varies from individual to individual and seems to be largely a function of the religious background, training, or beliefs of the person involved. Thus, most of those who are Christians in training or belief identify the light as Christ, or sometimes draw biblical parallels in support of their interpretation. A Jewish man and woman identified the light as an angel. It was clear, though, in both cases that the subjects did not mean to imply that the beings had wings, played a harp, or even had a human shape or appearance. There was only the light. What each was trying to get across was that they took the being to be an emissary or a guide. A man who had no religious beliefs or training at all prior to his or her experience simply described what was seen as a being of light. The same label was used by one lady of the Christian faith who apparently did not feel any compulsion at all to call the Christ. Certainly in the interviews that I did, no one mentioned it as Christ. They just said that they had no fear of death. And many of them had not told anyone. You know, it makes me think I should do this work again because it was really interesting. Shortly after its appearance, the being begins to communicate with the person who is passing over. Notably, this communication is the same direct kind which we encountered earlier in the description of how a person in the spiritual body may pick up the thoughts of those around him or her. For here again, people claim that they did not hear any physical voice or sounds coming from the being, nor did they respond to the being through audible sounds. Rather, it is reported that direct, unimpeded transfer of thoughts takes place, and in such a clear way that there is no possibility whatsoever either of misunderstanding or of lying to the light. Certainly what I was told was there was no telepathy in one case. Actually, there has been telepathy in other cases. In the one case I'm referring to, the person felt intense love from this light being. Another man told me that he found himself in a place that was very white, very misty. In fact, things were glowing. That's right, grass was glowing. So there was kind of like an auric field around the grass, and he did see other beings, and he knew them. So it's not an unfamiliar landscape to us. That's why people often talk about the other side as going home. And I know when I feel sad, I want to go home. I don't see this lifetime as my home, you know, and I just get this yearning to go back to what was love. Somehow I feel that maybe in a previous life, you know, it really was a loving space because I came into this world with such a loving heart, and sometimes it's very hard to be in a world where people are not so kind, but it's just that they're in fear and they don't know that love. But I guess when they pass over, they're reminded. So this is for everyone. This is not just, I'm just sharing with you what I think, but everyone goes back to this. So this is really just for your information. Raymond Moody goes on to say, furthermore, this unimpeded exchange does not even take place in the native language of the person, yet he understands perfectly and is instantaneously aware. He cannot even translate the thoughts and exchanges which took place while he was near death into the human language which he must speak now after his resuscitation. You'll find too with children when they've died and come back, they may talk about that they met this being, and they may even call it Jesus or something else. Could be a grandparent. Describe what they look like. I know one case, a child described their grandparent who they'd never seen, and the parents were shocked. So Raymond goes on to say, the next step of the experience clearly illustrates the difficulty of translating from the unspoken language. The being almost immediately directs a certain thought to the person into whose presence it has come so dramatically. Usually the persons with whom I have talked try to formulate the thought into a question. Among the translations I have heard are you prepared to die? Are you ready to die? What have you done with your life to show me? And what have you done with your life that is sufficient? The first two formulations, which stress preparation, might as first seem to have a different sense from the second pair, which emphasise accomplishment. However, some support for my own feeling that everyone is trying to express the same thought comes from the narrative of one woman who put it this way, and this is in quotes. The first thing he said to me was that he kind of asked me if I was ready to die, or what I had done with my life that I wanted to show him, which was just said. Furthermore, Raymond says, even in the case of more unusual ways of phrasing the question, it turns out upon elucidation to have much the same force. For example, one man told me that during his death, and in quotes, the voice asked me a question, is it worth it? And what it meant was, did the kind of life I had been leading up to that point seem worthwhile to me then, knowing what I then knew? Raymond says, incidentally, all insists that this question, ultimate and profound as it may be in its emotional impact, is not at all asked in condemnation. The being, all seem to agree, does not direct the question to them to accuse or to threaten them, for they still feel the total love and acceptance coming from the light, no matter what their answer may be. Rather, the point of the question seems to be to make them think about their lives, to draw them out. It is, if you will, a Socratic question, that's Socrates. One asked not to acquire information, but to help the person who is being asked to proceed along the path to the truth by himself or herself. And then he goes on below to talk about examples of near death from this being. So I'll just read you out a few examples. Example 1, in quotes, I heard the doctors say that I was dead. And that's when I began to feel as though I were tumbling, actually kind of floating through this blackness, which was some kind of enclosure. There are not really words to describe this. Everything was very black except that way off from me, I could see this light. It was a very, very brilliant light, but not too large at first. It grew larger as I came nearer and nearer to it. I was trying to get to that light at the end because I felt that it was Christ, and I was trying to reach that point. It was not a frightening experience. It was more or less a pleasant thing. For immediately, being a Christian, I had connected the light with Christ, who said, I am the light of the world. I said to myself, if this is it, if I'm to die, then I know who waits for me at the end, there in that light. The second example, again in quotes, I got up and walked into the hall to get a drink, and it was at that point, as they found out later, that my appendix ruptured. I became very weak and I fell down. I began to feel a sort of drifting, a movement of my real being in and out of my body, and to hear beautiful music. I floated on down the hall and out the door onto the screened-in porch. That's like a veranda. There it almost seemed that clouds, a pink mist really, began to gather around me. And then I floated right straight on through the screen, just as though it weren't there, and up into this pure crystal clear light, an illuminating white light. It was beautiful and so bright, so radiant, but it didn't hurt my eyes. An illuminating white light. It's not any kind of light you can describe on earth. I didn't actually see a person in this light, and yet it has a special identity. It definitely does. It is a light of perfect understanding. It is a light of perfect understanding and perfect love. The thought came to my mind, lovest thou me? This was not exactly in the form of a question, but I guess the connotation of what the light said was, if you do love me, go back and complete what you began in your life. And all during this time, I felt as though I was surrounded by an overwhelming love and compassion. You know, this lady I've met who's the daughter of the owner of the place I'm in at the moment, she's an emergency nurse. And I asked her about that. And she said, yes, there are spirits hanging around the emergency department at the hospital she's at. They don't kind of talk about it, but she said things go bang, things fall off things go, may fly around the room. I don't think it's literally flying, but maybe something, it's just a projectile or something. She said no one worries about it, but they know that, there is stuff going on. And in fact, this example, the third example, talks about nurses. So let's go on. Example 3, I knew I was dying and that there was nothing I could do about it because no one could hear me. I was out of my body. There's no doubt about it because I could see my own body there on the operation room table. My soul was out. All this made me feel very bad at first, but then this really bright light came. It did seem that it was a little dim at first, but then it was this huge beam. It was just a tremendous amount of light, nothing like a big bright flashlight. It was just too much light, and it gave off heat to me. I felt a warm sensation. It was a bright yellowish white, more white. It was tremendously bright. I just can't describe it. It seemed that it covered everything, yet it didn't prevent me from seeing everything around me. The operating room, the doctors, the nurses, everything. I could see clearly, and it wasn't blinding. At first when the light came, I wasn't sure what was happening, but then it kind of asked me if I was ready to die. It was like talking to a person, but a person wasn't there. The light's what was talking to me, but in a voice. Now, I think that the voice that was talking to me actually realised that I wasn't ready to die. It was just kind of testing me more than anything else. Yet, from the moment the light spoke to me, I felt really good, secure and loved. The love which came from it is just unimaginable, indescribable. It was a fun person to be with, and it had a sense of humour too, definitely. So that's a little bit out of Raymond Moody, and that's Raymond Moody, M-O-O-D-Y. What was really interesting, when I first came across Raymond Moody, I was in Canberra, and I lived in Moody Street, M-O-O-D-I-E actually, and that's where I did the research on near death. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the light. And I think I've done this for me as much as I've done this for you, because I really didn't want to go on yesterday because of a long-term conflict. it's, in my case, I haven't been able to accept the negative behaviour of others. But in order to do peace, I have to accept the negative as part of the big picture. Now, what I've run through with you here is we are all at choice as to how we choose to live our life. And if we knew that we go on after death and that we are met by a being of light and that being is wondering and questioning you, but you're not being judged. It's really just reflecting questions so that you reflect more deeply on who you are and what you choose. Sometimes we learn best by choosing things that are not so easy. Maybe if we're going from life to life, we learn from those experiences and we evolve or expand. This other side that I'm sort of describing, I can't even touch on in the most barest of ways, in the sense that this other side is completely beyond our understanding. However, through research like this, we can get a little bit of a sense that there is an intelligence beyond the veil and that we do not know everything there is to know. In fact, we know that we don't know in truth. But if we open our minds to the possibility there is more, maybe we may live our lives a little bit differently and we may be more thoughtful of how we treat other people. So what I would say to people listening to this, if you've listened this long, if you've done the wrong thing by someone, resolve the matter. If there's things you need to say to people who are your parents or in any other context, say the words that need to be said. Often people don't. Their loved ones die and they never got to say sorry or to say I love you, for example. Don't leave any stone unturned. Resolve everything. So by the time it's your turn to pass over, you've completed what you're here to do. Otherwise, you come back. And that's something I realised when I wanted to end my life. Because of my spiritual perspective, I knew I couldn't. So I knew I had to endure. And not only endure, I have to transcend what I believe is problematic. And I've got to be able to look straight through that problem into the love that is unconditional. So with that, I send you unconditional love. That is a love that has no conditions. That we just love the world as it shows up and know that everybody's here to learn something and we can't know what the purpose is. Now, even in conflicts such as Palestine and Israel, it doesn't mean you can't be creative and evoke change. If you're in a situation of oppression, you can. In fact, being artistic is a great way of transmuting suffering. For me, I write poetry. I do what I can. You may be in Syria. You may have lost your family. You may be filled with absolute despair. But I feel to say to you, there is something bigger around all of this. Ask for the help that you need. Even if you can just hold on to a little spark of something. Whatever works for you, find that spark. Give to others what you need. So if you need love, give love to other people. Help someone else out. But don't, if you can, don't descend into dislike or hatred towards anyone. It only hurts you and it'll bind you to a really deep pain and hardship. I mean, you have to go through the grief. There are processes within grief. But ultimately, there has to be a letting go. And we're not here very long on the planet. And the only thing I can offer to you is that everything happens for a purpose. And the challenge is to continue to love, to not let love be changed by those who don't. So they often say, be the presence of love. It is probably the hardest thing you will do, particularly if you've suffered great injustice. So I send love to all those who I have felt have hurt me, who have not understood me, who have demonized me, and who have lied about me. I forgive you with all my heart. You are me. I am you. We are one. And I send a great prayer of love to the whole world, that we may come into the truth that is in reality the peace that passeth all understanding, and that we reunite as one family, and we resolve all conflict within and outside of ourselves with great patience and understanding. And I send this specifically to world leaders as well. The greatest wisdom is meeting people halfway and knowing that nothing is ever one-sided. It is always a combination of two. We are all responsible for what we co-create with each other. So let's take responsibility. Let's show love and change this world into one that has real hope for a world peaceful. If you want to go to my website, it's www.worldpeacefull.com. Thank you for listening and watching. I love you.